Yes, it works. Thank you. Well, welcome. Fantastic to see so many of you here tonight at this very special book presentation that we have organized for you. I just heard that there's also 60 people joined us online. So we have a very big audience for Jean Boulton's book presentation. My name is Wilma Waterlander, and I welcome you on behalf of the National Knowledge Network on Systems Thinking, funded by the Dutch Heart Foundation, and also on behalf of Karen den Hertog, who later will be doing the Q&A with Jean, and also the Federation for Health of the that's also co-organizing this session for you tonight. So we will have first the presentation by Jean, about 40 to 45 minutes. Then there will be room for questions with the audience and also online to join with the Mentimeter. You can ask your questions there, and I'll try to present them to Jean as well. And then at the end, you can buy the book here and then go downstairs at the drinks. There will be room to get a signature as well. So we have that all organized. I think that's all the things that I had to say, and then I'll be happy to give the word to you to tell us all about your book.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. It's absolutely lovely to be here, and to have an opportunity to talk to many people about these ideas, and to introduce the ideas in this new book that came out in September. I'm Jean Boulton, in case you haven't guessed, and to say a little bit about me, I originally studied physics, theoretical physics, and my PhD was in quantum physics, which kind of messes up your brain early. You know, it tells you that the world doesn't go to plan. There's something paradoxical and intangible that you grapple with in grappling with quantum physics. That set me off as a research physicist. I eventually moved into engineering. I did an MBA. I moved into management, and I came across the ideas of complexity theory in the 1990s. And it just was a kind of moment for me of saying, gosh, this makes so much sense. This is a scientific theory that makes sense of the social world. And I got very entranced and excited by those ideas, and indeed have remained so ever since. And the kind of the strapline for the book, in a sense, is that the world is complex, whether you like it or not. It isn't a method, it isn't an opinion, it's a description of the way the world works, the way the world changes, the way the world is. So social scientists called it an ontological stance, but it's like a cosmology, a metaphysics, a world view. So what I'm talking about is this world view that comes from the world of physics and biology is telling us something about the nature of the complex world. So it's not just saying it's complex and messy, you'll just have to get used to it and it's tough. It's not saying that. It's saying, what can we learn about the nature of the complex world that helps us to live and work effectively in that world? So that's where I'm coming from. And this book, in a variety of ways, it's written in a particular style. It's almost written as a series of essays that I've called pieces that you can kind of pick up and really reflect on. It's got many stories and examples. And the intention in the book is for you in a variety of ways to kind of meet complexity, grapple with these ideas, deepen your kind of engagement with them. So it's a kind of trying to write about the nuance of these ideas, rather than give you a kind of pat answer, a kind of, simple answer. So I hope that makes some sense. And what I'm going to do is to walk you through the book and summarise some of those aspects of what I've been writing about, not all of it. And I in particular, I'll say it now because I've started, but in particular, I'm going to actually shine the light of these ideas onto global issues, which, as you might agree, have been changing rather rapidly and radically at the moment, and is something that we're going to have to kind of reflect on and engage with. So I could talk, the book has got aspects of what does this mean for us as individuals, what does it mean for organisations, for strategy, for change, but I'm going to particularly talk about global issues at the end of this talk. Although, you'll have an opportunity to ask me whatever questions you like. So I hope that sounds all right so far. And I've asked Wilma to just keep an eye on the time for me, because I am capable of speaking without drawing breath for hours. So when I get going, I'm so excited. So I've asked Wilma to wave at me ever so often. So I hope you might notice me taking sharp intakes of breath and trying to speed up. So this is the book. The book has got these two aspects to it: making sense and making waves. And so the first part of the book is introducing these ideas of the science of complexity. And the second part of the book is saying, so what can we do then? So what does it mean? And I use the phrase making waves in particular because it is a bit like ripples and waves. We can do things, but in a complex world, we don't exactly know where it'll end. So we can have intentions, but we may not get there. We can forge a path, but things may happen on the way. So I rather like the idea of making waves. I'm going to act, but I can't be sure that I'm going to make the change that I expect to. So it has that kind of quality in it. So the first part of the book, this is written, I hope, in a way that's academically solid. It's not aiming to be a superficial book. It's grounded. It's referenced. There are footnotes or endnotes, but I'm trying to write it in a way that's really hopefully accessible to anyone who's interested in these ideas. But the first part of the book, and I've called it the Long Walk to Freedom, and it's explaining how science and what we all were brought up to think of as science is the science of Isaac Newton from the 17th century, a great step forward in science, or the first step in science, in modern science, to say we can understand the way the planets go around the sun to a first order, to an approximation, really well. There's something there that is elegantly beautiful and is predictive of the future of the planets. If we know where they are here, we pretty much know what's going to happen, at least to a first order approximation. So this classical science is what most people think science is. And what I'm showing in the first part of the book is how we got to a more complex understanding of uncertainty, of connection, through this walk through science, via the person who did much of this work, who got the Nobel Prize for a contribution to this work, Ilya Prigogine, who got the Nobel Prize in 1976. Where I'll talk a little bit more about him in a minute, but he was really engaging with why is it that science seems to tell us that things either go perfectly to plan, or the theories of gases and liquids seem to tell us that things settle into equilibrium naturally. Why is it that evolution shows us that form and structure and complexity emerges through evolution, that we start with simple cells and we end up with the wonderful things called humans, as a complexification. Why do none of these things kind of fit together? And the Nobel Prize he got for, I like to say this, he probably wouldn't like me to say this, but he got the Nobel Prize for one word, which is he realised that these classical theories of physics only apply to closed systems. You have to assume that nothing can get in or out of the thing that you're looking at. Makes the mathematics tractable. But of course, in our social world, and indeed in galaxies and ecologies, things are open to their wider environment. So with this one word, open, which allows energy and resources and information to kind of flow in and out of your thing of interest, you find that order can emerge, that structure can emerge in the way that it does in evolutionary systems, in the natural world. So with one word, he was able to join the two theories of physics and this theory from evolution, and they were all starting to say the same thing, that we live in a world of emerging systemic patterning and the emergence of form. So it was a very important contribution, and where I came into this field of study. The other thing that I talk about at the beginning of the book and a bit in the appendix, and it's a really important point because people think science is about certainty. So there's a sense in which if you're being scientific and professional in your organisation, then you're going to analyse the data, make a plan, it'll be the right plan, you'll then do the plan and measure its success. It has that kind of quality. That is to be professional, and that's seemingly based on science. But actually, even in physics, the totality of all the different types of physical forces in coming together on messy stuff in the galaxy does not present a picture of certainty. It actually presents in itself a picture of uncertainty. So we wouldn't have got a universe, we wouldn't have got galaxies if everything had been symmetrical and perfect and knowable. It was the messiness of the, if you want to start there with a Big Bang, it was the messiness and asymmetry of the Big Bang that started off the clumping together of stuff, and the fact that every single galaxy is different from every other, every planet is different from every other. It's something that Newton's physics has nothing to say about. And even at the time, Leibniz and Newton were having a conversation. And you can. I've got a book of the letters between, well, in fact, Clarke, who was one of Newton's students, and Leibniz. And Leibniz was saying, yes, but what about, the particular form of the things in the universe? And Newton had no answer to that. And Leibniz was saying, well, what if the universe had started half an hour earlier or later? Would it make a difference? Newton had no answer to that other than to say that it was God's will. And these early physicists were seeing themselves as revealing the mind of God. So they were expecting to have a physics that knew everything. That was kind of implicit in their view. And although we have many pieces of physics that on their own are deterministic, are kind of certain, when you bung them all together and have them acting on messy stuff that's open to the wider context, even that does not paint a picture of certainty. So it's just something to bear in mind when we think we're applying science to our kind of social world. And I'm not going to say very much about quantum physics here, you'll be pleased to know. But that introduces an even further idea that there really isn't an objective universe out there, that some of the modern quantum physicists like Carlo Rovelli, he talks about relational quantum physics, the fact that two incommensurable things can be both true at the same time in slightly different contexts. And it sort of blows your mind. It isn't like there is an objective thing out there to know. There's something that I talk in the book about ontological subjectivity or ontological indeterminism. So it isn't that it's too difficult to know, it's the fact that it can't be known because it isn't a thing in the way that we imagine that the universe is. So these are kind of deep concepts that I want to touch on in the book. And I'm trying, in a sense, I'm trying to make you feel uncomfortable and destabilise the idea of, it's not only that we've used the wrong science for the social world, but we've misunderstood what the science that we were using was saying anyway. Do you see what I mean? It's an important, and this book and my contribution to this in many ways is to rattle the cage of our beliefs and our worldviews. It's to kind of say, look, you know, science is saying something different than you think. You know, we're going to have to think differently. And from that thinking differently, it's a bit like I want to infect you with complexity so you can never unthink it, you know, when you'll never be the same again, and go back to how you were thinking. And then what you do is infected, is changed by the fact that you see, you know, you may see the world in a slightly different way. So that's in a way what I'm trying to do in the book. So let me say a bit about process complexity. So the book introduces or emphasizes this idea of the processual nature of the complex world. Not something that I invented, but Prigoghine's, one of Prigoghine's early books was called From Being to Becoming. And what he's meaning is that classical science theorizes that there are things interacting with forces. So they're kind of fixed things. A thing is a thing, and then you understand how it interacts with things. What Prigogine was showing and saying was that things are always in flow. Things are always changing and interweaving and interacting. And the paradox is that what keeps patterns of relationships, what keeps things stable in the social and natural world, is the fact that they can adapt to move. It's a relational interweaving, a reflexive process. So it's the very fact we can move that keeps us stable, if that makes sense. The patterns in our organisations, the patterns in our societies. What do I mean by patterns? The sort of relationships that tend to sustain, the sort of ways of doing things. If I join a new organisation, I will find it has completely different ways of doing things than my last organisation. I have to learn that. I have to learn what those patterns are like, those norms, in order to function well in that organisation. You know, where is power held? How do decisions get made? You know, do people adhere to the structure, or is nobody can find a structure chart because it doesn't really mean anything in this organisation. In another organisation, it does. So these are the kind of patterns of relationships that tend to sustain. And it's important, I'll say a bit more about this in a moment, it's important that we don't reify, we don't make solid these things like patterns of relationships or the ways that we do things here, because they're only as good as the kind of the sustaining of the relationships that sustains them. So I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. So what we're saying in this in-process complexity is not only that the world is in flow, is ever-changing, that even stability is a form of reflexive processual working, but we're also saying that the things in it, in many ways, themselves are processes. So I'm a process. So what do I mean by that? Well, partly there's all the different bits of me that hopefully keep working in relationship with each other and keep me together. But also I'm in process in the sense of that my life and who I am and what I've become has been shaped by the path that I followed. Some of it of my choosing, some of it not of my choosing. But nevertheless, who I keep becoming is affected by the context, the environment, the things that happen to me on the way, as well as my initial nature and my history and my ancestors and the whole thing. So there is a sense in which I can see myself not as a fixed thing. It's always sad, isn't it, when people say about their children, oh, that's the naughty one, or, because it sort of fixes them, doesn't it? It's different to say that was a naughty thing you just did, or maybe that wasn't very kind. Is a different process than to try and fix people in a kind of, because of course those things have an effect, don't they? Because I'm a process. If you keep telling me I'm naughty, I'll probably believe you. The other side of being a process is that I'm different not just in my kind of, on this ongoing journey, but who I'm with. If you look at me nicely, I will say different things, weirdly, than if you look bored, then I will say something different. I'm not saying you have to look at me nicely, but what I become in this room is a function of our relationship, isn't it? Even if you're saying nothing, there's a kind of visceral feeling between us that affects who we are. So that's what I'm really getting to. And the interesting thing is, to go back to the first bit, so when we talk about things being complex, I've thought a lot about this. This is a kind of development of some of the work you'll find in this field. Things are deemed complex when they are open to the wider environment, made of things which are sort of processual in themselves, that are diverse and can change, and connected in reflexive ways. So they're the kind of conditions for saying this is a complex situation, this is complexity. There's got to be an interweaving of things, a kind of relationality, not everything with everything, but the potential for an interaction. And what I mean by reflexivity is, if I say something to you, I affect you. If you say something back to me, that affects me. And there's something. But meanwhile, we're having this conversation. Something's happened. Somebody else comes in, and then they talk to you. And that's the kind of way in which we affect each other and start to change. And the things may be able to learn. They're not fixed things in the way that I've just described. There's learning, there's change. And the way we interact changes. So that's the kind of definition of the complex world. And then our question is, well, if that's what we've got, what does it behave like? That's the second part of the question. What can we know from the science about the kind of characteristic behaviours that we would expect to see? So I've really come to understand or feel that the common feature, whether you're talking about galaxies, brains, ecologies, families, communities, is that the world tends to show up as patterns of relationships, patterns of behaviour, patterns of relationships, norms, cultural norms, the kind of, relationships you would get in a galaxy, the particular flora and fauna that happen to have stabilised on this particular pond or on in that particular wood. So there's something about patterns of relationships that can emerge, stabilise for a while, and then may dissolve, may run away, may collapse, may morph into something else. So that's the kind of image I have in my head that seems to come out of this work is the primacy, the saliency, the primacy of patterns. The other thing that I want to point out in terms of a complexity informed worldview is the fact that we're starting with the micro, the granular. It's not an abstraction. I'm not talking about... So to give you an example, I remember somebody telling me that they'd been writing about coupled systems. So they were using this idea of coupled systems to talk about the parental system and the way the parental system interacted with the teacher system, and then there was the pupil system. Now, what I would say to that is well, it isn't like, the parents aren't a system. They might not know each other. The staff are not necessarily a system. What happens in those interactions is that you go and see the teacher of your child, and then you bump into another teacher that you knew because your other child was in their form, and the interacting that creates the patterning in the system comes from the micro, from the individuals. Now, it might build up into patterns, but the patterns, the strong patterns, may not necessarily be all the parents and all the teachers and all the pupils, will they? You will have groupings in a variety of ways that would potentially cross over those boundaries. So my theorising is always from the micro. I'm always saying, how do these patterns build up from that detail, rather than in what's called an abstracted or first order approximation, where we start talking about kind of feedback loops or qualities that happen at the aggregate level. So that's where I'm starting from. And then these posh words down here, and the book has a lot to say about those. That is how I've come to understand the different qualities, and they are themselves systemic, of the complex world. You know, those are the kind of things. And I'm not going to say too much about that. You're welcome to ask me questions, but I won't. That would take me 2 hours, and I promise not to go into that too much. But we're saying things are interwoven. They tend to be patterned. They tend to be things are always becoming. They're always in flow, which doesn't mean that things don't stabilise, but they stabilise because of this movement, if you like. History matters. Context matters. And this is a very important part of this. It isn't a generalised, abstracted, universal theory. It's saying, in the way that I was talking earlier on today about evolution. You know, the evolutionary process is always a local and contextual issue. You know, if a frog is born with longer legs at 2:30 on a Tuesday in this pond, the question is, is it going to do better than its brothers who don't have as long a legs? Well, that depends on where the flies sit. If it can get more of the flies because they hover a bit higher, then it'll do better. If it's got to have more food because it's got longer legs and there's more of it, then it'll do worse. So what creates an evolutionary change is in a sense always about the particular context at the point in time when it happens, and whether there's an optimization, an improvement for that frog to do better than its brothers and sisters. That may then spread because there's something then the frog with longer legs gets the girl and is popular, and then their children have longer legs, and then it becomes something that's kind of instituted in the system. But it's about the particularities of history and context that is really emphasised in these ideas. Paradox is really something I can say a bit more about later. But in this patterned, complex world, it doesn't generally resolve itself into unequivocal, objective facts. You know, you can look at so questions like what are the edges of this pattern? What are the edges of this pond? You know, is a question that is subjective. It is not. You can't just measure it. You can't be objective about it. It's something that has a subjectivity. So there's something intrinsically. I'm not explaining this very well. I can hear myself thinking, but there's something intrinsically paradoxical about the complex world that we have to grapple with. I can say a bit more about that later. So that's what I'm talking about in the book, so that's my 20-minute timer there. So thank you. And I think I'm going to come back to those. I might come back to those as an example. So I want to say a bit now about Daoism. You'll notice the book's called The Dao of Complexity. And I first came across the Tao Te Ching as a teenager, and I certainly didn't understand it. I found it very difficult to kind of grasp at that age, but it intrigued me. And when I was working at Cranfield with Peter Allen, Peter Allen worked with Prigogine, and I really learnt a lot of my complexity from working with Peter Allen and from what he had to say. And he came back to Cranfield in the east of England, where we were both working, clutching. He'd been to London to a meeting, and he had a copy of the Tao Te Ching, and it was a particular Ames and Hall 2003 copy. And he's saying, "You have to look at this. The introduction reads just like a complexity theory textbook." And so this intrigued me because it was something I was interested in anyway. And lo and behold, the Ames and Hall are very good. They have a very long introduction. The introduction is as long as the Tao Te Ching itself. And they describe the ideas, the processual thinking, the contextual thinking, the paradoxical thinking, all these kind of qualities in the Tao Te Ching. And it really is. It's like, and I thought that was amazing. You know, how can something from the 5th century BC have such similarity, such resonance with something that's kind of, come out of beyond modern physics and, all this kind of thinking in the late 20th century or the mid 20th century. So that is really interesting. And the other thing, another thing that was interesting about this is like, well, how did they know? What were they doing to get their view of the world? And they were doing something that the pragmatist philosophers have called a naturalistic metaphysics. In other words, they were creating their understanding of the world through being in it. It wasn't like Plato had ideas like, well, there's perfect form somewhere outside the universe and our job is to become perfect. They were almost like stories or abstractions. But these guys were saying, what do we understand about the world through being in it? It had that sort of natural view. And if you think about it, where Prigogine was starting was not with maths or with concepts. He was saying in the work, I didn't say that actually, but his work started with looking at something called the Belousov-Sabotinsky experiment, which was looking at the emergence of patterns on the surface of liquids in situations where they were this chemical system was opened to, it could exchange energy, it could be energized from the wider world. And when they first discovered these patterns in the liquids, they couldn't believe, they thought it was a mistake. They thought these guys were just bad experimenters. And it was really Prigogine who got excited about why it was that you started getting a reversal of what you'd expect in these open systems. So he was also dealing with something real. He was looking at patterns of emerging in a chemical system. These guys were looking at the world. But there's something that I'll say a bit more about the fact that these ideas are coming from being there. They're not they're not just a theory that somebody's having an idea about. And this phrase that I think has really become quite precious to me. The simple phrase, this isn't actually from the Tao Te Ching, this is by Machado, but it is this idea of the path is made through walking that encapsulates in many ways what the Taoist message is. In other words, the future is co-created by our actions and what we do. So we're co-creating the future. The future is not laid down. There isn't a path to follow. It isn't a thing that you have to follow. It is we are co-creating the future through our actions and intentions. And that's a very potent idea, I think. It's kind of up to all of us. We are making the future. We're also obviously not starting with nothing. We're stepping into a flow that's already there. If we don't always choose the things that we're starting with, or the world that we're born into. So we're carrying on the baton, if you like. We're picking up the baton to move forward. But it's a very, very powerful idea of path dependency, of a future that we're co-creating. The other thing that's important about Daoism is that it's more than a worldview. They're not just describing. There's quite a lot about paradox in the Tao Te Ching. So there's this idea of the end is entailed in the beginning. There's always some truth in the opposite. And one of the ideas that I really like in the Tao Te Ching, which is just one of the things that's interesting when you look at resonant ideas is that they always have something in it. And I think, oh, golly, that's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. And one of the ideas that I like from the Tao Te Ching is this idea of the beginning of the beginning. And what we're invited to do is, you know, if you're a leader, it's important to apprehend the wider context. So they talk. The Art of War is the other Daoist book, and it's telling you how to win a war partly. But the idea is that you have to pay attention in a kind of right brain overview way of what's all out there. You know, how do we apprehend this wider context? And then how can I get attuned to, be good at, to see an opportunity or a slight movement or a slight cracking or something like that at the beginning of it. So we're used in the West to saying, well, we can't take notice of that because we don't know if it's real yet. So by the time it becomes real, I did some work a few years ago on in an issue of why wasn't a drought called by some of the aid agencies in northeast Africa. This was in 2012. And part of the answer was because they wanted to be certain. By the time you're certain, you know there's a drought because people are dying and cattle are dead. So it is certain, but how do you attune yourself to be able to be poised enough to notice, to be confident about taking smaller signals, qualitative signals, and in that case, you know, to make it more real, people were talking about the need to build trusted relationships, to be there long enough that the people who do know more, you know, who are out there in the bush, and the Turkana, the nomads. They would know, but we don't listen because we believe, you know, we have to have the hard data, you know, from the thermometer in order to decide what to do. So I think that's a very interesting idea. And if you think about that in leadership terms, if you're a good leader or if you're a facilitator, suppose you've been asked to run a meeting and, you know, you have to attune to the group. You know, if you barge in too early, you won't get anywhere. So you've got to, excuse me, you've got to attune to the whole picture. Then you've got to pick your moment. There's something about when is that's an opening. I can say something there. I can make a difference. I can nudge here. And the good facilitator will work like that. They'll both apprehend the whole picture, but have a sort of sensitivity about, you know, how and when to intervene. So that's the Dao De Ching. How am I doing? I've done 30 minutes already. I'm only on slide 3. So the book starts with the science. It debunks the idea that physics is certain about the future, even in its own terms. It introduces process complexity. It introduces Daoism. And then it looks at this idea of resonance with other ideas. And I really enjoyed this. This was a kind of piece of research. It wasn't you know, I wasn't completely sure I was going to write a book, but I just kept having these ideas about, well, I've just read this book on the brain. I watched this TV program by David Eagleman, which is on YouTube, and I recommend it. And it's just like, oh, you know, they're talking about the brain having patterns that are path dependent, you know, that depend on what's happened to you, and are both relatively stable, but are plastic. They use the word plasticity of the brain, that they can still move into something else. So we've got patterns that can move. If you look at the work of the pragmatists, there's some great similarities between some of these ideas. And I also got absolutely entranced by a whole series of books by political writers who were in political situations, so not so much theorists, but people who were describing and reflecting on their experience. People like Václav Havel, who went on to be president of Czechoslovakia, and the way they describe the way power constellates and what seemed to be needed to actually make those changes was, again, very reminiscent of the kind of patterning and understanding that I got from complexity theory. So my point in using the word resonance is I'm not trying to say to you, these are all the same. You know, I can prove it, they're all the same. I'm saying, isn't it interesting, these similarities in this worldview, the way they describe their experience, seems to have a lot in common with each other and, you know, with the way that I've understood complexity, a complexity worldview. Maybe we're onto something. Maybe there's something solid here that is something that's worth taking notice of. So the book sort of wanders around this kind of field and suggests to you that it's interesting to look at some of these similarities and differences. And when you start to read these political books, they also, of course, have things to offer in the way that I was talking about with understanding Daoism. So that's the next part of the book. I then talk about ways of knowing, which I'm going to leave for now, and then the last part of the book is this kind of so what question. So what do you do? And spoiler alert, it doesn't turn into a series of methodologies. So if you like methodologies, you won't like it because it doesn't have them. It is more about, if you think differently, then maybe you will approach your leadership or approach your strategizing in a different way. So it has stories, it has examples, it has suggestions, but it doesn't turn into a thing you can tear a page out and stick on a flip chart and do. So it's not how I tend to think. What I think is that if you really are changed in your view of, for example, you know, well, I get this about patterns. I see patterns in my family. I see patterns in your family. I see your organisation culture is different to mine. I need to have a tool for pattern spotting. Then you'll go and find one. There's plenty out there, but you won't find one in my book. It's not where I'm heading. I'm trying to get you to look for a pattern spotting method. And sometimes there are no methods. It's more about, you know, we're going to have to work in a messy, complex way here to try and surface what's there and make some judgment collectively about the way forward in this messy, complex and subjective world. So that's where I'm heading with some of this. Okay, so how long have how am I doing? I've got 5 minutes? 10 minutes. Oh, 10 minutes. Oh. So I want to say a little bit. I could go at this point I could talk about the individual, I can talk about organisations, but I wanted to take the opportunity to shine the lens of complexity onto a discourse on global issues. And one of the things that I would like to kind of say about these ideas is when people talk about complex systems, it already sounds like it's stable. It's a kind of thing. We've already in the choice of the word system, and people sometimes talk about complex adaptive systems. It sounds like there's a thing that we can say is complex and it adapts. And what I think is a broader view of complexity is we can understand the conditions in which things become relatively stable and adaptive, which is to do with a need for diversity, relative equality, interconnection, and in human terms, you know, a kind of general understanding that we're better if, you know, that we'll do better if we understand that we're all in it together. So there are some conditions for resilience in the way that if I had a family, when one has a family, you know, if you want your family to be adaptive and resilience, there's something about enough stability but enough diversity. You know, enough. You know, if Dad's late home from work, you know, Mum can cook the tea. You know, if Granny comes to stay, the world doesn't end. You know, the bedrooms can be moved around. If the house burns down, God forbid, the family could reorganise themselves in Granny's home for a bit. That would be a kind of adaptive, resilient kind of family. So we kind of understand the conditions for something to adapt. But things can be complex and lose their diversity and lose their connections and not be as adaptive. They may become more chaotic, or aspects of them may become more chaotic, or they may become more rigid. And what we are seeing in terms of things getting out of balance in a kind of global and political world is, if you don't act to maintain that diversity and resilience and relative equality, and there are neither values that value that, or a kind of governance process that holds you to some extent into that, then it's easy for the ruthless, for the rich to become richer, for the powerful to become more powerful. So there's sort of the path dependency around power is, if you don't, if that's allowed to just happen and people are ruthless, then, for example, do you remember the stories about when there were first supermarkets? They dropped their prices. They could afford to drop their prices for long enough to put the smaller shops out of business, and then they can raise their prices again. There's all sorts of ruthless ways that you can act if you have enough power, if that's how you want, if you want to win, if your desire is to have a personal winning over other people, then that's what you can do. So we understand from complexity how that lock-in of power can happen, and indeed what you need to do to ward against it. So what these books are describing, and this Eke Temelkuran is a Turkish journalist, and she wrote this book in 2016, and she talked about the 7 steps from democracy to dictatorship. And it's very, very uncanny, some of it. So things like, I'm thinking of one of our UK politicians. She talks about it's okay to, if we laugh at somebody, if we regard a politician as a joke, we feel better somehow. So we're saying, oh, he's just stupid. You know, do you know what he said then? You know, and there's a sort of joke. If you're a politician, it's power. You don't mind being laughed at because you're getting publicity. Do you see what I mean? So she goes through these kind of ways that power can get constellated, reduce the power of the judiciary, you know, all the things. And you kind of, you know, one can see these things happening. So I'm interested in this idea of path dependency, power and lock-in, which I look at in the book. And I suppose the point I'm making is that complexity thinking is not just telling us how things are resilient and adaptive. It also explains why things sometimes get chaotic and why sometimes things get locked in, get unassailable. That it's impossible to change the system because the power in the relationships of the people, you know, that are in power doesn't really allow very much way in. So what can you do then? And I've thought a lot about this, and I suppose the things that spring to mind are, and it's what Adam Smith talked about, you know, in his views of how do you make an economy resilient. He didn't mean you leave it to itself, and you know, and selfishness is a good thing, you know, that we kind of, you know, we regard selfishness as okay, because if everybody's selfish, it'll work out all right in the end. He talked about the importance of what he called, Adam Smith, moral sentiments, and the importance of values. So if we're going to build a society that's resilient, we're going to have to care about each other. We're going to have values that we're going to have to value both ourselves, each other, and the future, and the planet. So that is a kind of aspect of, I'm going to have to curtail my behaviour. I can't just say, I'll be as ruthless and selfish as I want. And if you're as ruthless and selfish as you want, well, that's okay. You know, there is something about if you want to have a stable and interwoven, if you want to embrace the fact that we are all in it together, and we're in it with the environment and the whole planet, we have to act with that in mind. So that's one thing. And the other thing that I want to say in particular is that that complexity can often feel like, and in the way that it sometimes gets talked about, that the sort of self-organising processes are all bottom up, and there's something that we can just pay attention to, the interweaving of those aspects. But everything that is there is going to affect the future. So leadership structures are still all part of the complex situation. And there is a role for leadership, in my view, in this. It isn't as we've seen with a laissez-faire economy, the accelerating state of inequality is still accelerating. That if things are not, in a sense, governed, and we don't have moral values, we either self-organise ourselves in a value sense to not be greedy, or we have to have governance processes that actually push back against some of this kind of constellating of power. So what does governance mean in a global world? What's the role of people in this? So final slide, and 2 minutes, so, is what can I do then? So this is I'm talking about values, I'm talking about governance, but one of the things that I really feel has really sunk into my psyche really is if we're making the path through walking, but what we understand from complexity thinking is the future's not knowable. It's not random, but it's not knowable in entirety. So we can't use, and I hope this phrase translates okay, the end cannot justify the means. This is a saying by Aldous Huxley. So in other words, I can't say, well, I'm trying to do good, and I think a good thing was if we got rid of this bad leader. This may be a story you recognise. So I'll tell a few lies on the way, but that's okay because I'm lying about certain things, because I know that the outcome, which is a really good outcome, which we need to get rid of this leader. And what this says is, well, you don't know whether you'll get rid of the leader, and even if you do, will you really get what you expect? But the lies are inculcated in the system. And I think we've perhaps seen over the last decade or two that lying for politicians always lied, but they used to look at least ashamed. But these days they just kind of go, oh well, I lied, you found out, never mind, ha ha, and things carry on. It has become normalised. That is how culture gets normalised. It's because we do things that create the future. So it matters what we do. It matters what we believe. It matters. Do we believe that people are selfish, or do we believe that people have the ability to have compassion as well as be selfish? So what it says to me is, in my own terms, whatever this means to me, I want to try and seed the future with good ingredients. I want to do my best that each step I take is the best I can make it in my terms. You might not think it is, but I think, I want to think about that and do my best. So I think this does come down to a kind of individual behaviour. I'm not going to read all this, but I just... so when one of the things that I think that this idea of not knowing the future gives us is, in a way, there's always hope. And I was... there's a guy called Clive Hamilton. I think this is the last the page of the book. And Clive Hamilton was talking about climate change denial. But what he talks about is he read Camus' book, The Plague. And in this story, which many of you will know, is this village, this town had the plague, and it was cut off from the rest of the world. So how did people behave? So some people took all the food they could find, barricaded the doors, and selfishly tried to sit it out and didn't care about anybody else. Other people said, well, we're going to die anyway, so we may as well die happy. So they, they enjoyed themselves in as many ways as they could. But the doctor, who knew more than anybody that the likelihood was that things were very dire and people would probably die, continued to act with hope, continued to behave with integrity, to look after the sick, and kept going. And Clive Hamilton calls this active fatalism, and it's something that we need to think about. Is even though things seem awful, and some of what we're facing in our world today seems to me the worst I've seen it in my lifetime. It's kind of, some of it is gobsmackingly awful. But I've got to act with integrity, but I've also got to somehow act with the idea that however awful it is, you never know. You know, you never know what's going to happen. Things turn on a pin sometimes, and that is a kind of hope as well. So I think I'm going to leave it there. As you can see, there's at least another 4 hours worth, but I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for listening, and well.
Well, thank you so much, Jean, for this wonderful talk.
Sorry, I've got to sit on my... So I'm going to hike my skirt up.
I'm just going to distract all of you so that you're not going to look at Jean.
Fall off the seat, yes.
And let's thank the audience, because all of you here in the room and all of you at home, you actually showed up tonight. You choose not to do many other things, but be here and be a bit infected about how complex the world is, and hopefully take something away from that. So thank you very much. My name is Karen den Hertog. I work with the City of Amsterdam and Public Health Amsterdam, and really honored that Jean wanted to make a stop between her hometown and Berlin, where she's going to spend the next couple of days. And just to kick this next Q&A part off, I was wondering, could you share with us what was the bit of the book that was most fun to write, and what was the bit of the book that was most difficult for you?
Oh, that's interesting. I think the writing about the political I really enjoyed it. I kept finding odd books, you know, sort of. There was one about how the Muppets were introduced into Russia, and how it was a kind of political act to democratise. This was at the end of the Cold War, and it's like, oh wow, that's so interesting. And then you read it, and these kind of ideas come out of it. So I really enjoyed researching, and it wasn't really researching. I just kept coming across ideas and books and things, and it really made me think. So I think that was probably. I think the hardest to write was probably the bit on process complexity, because it's where I've worked for such a long time. It was just it's harder to summarise and synthesise something you really know a lot about. So that was quite a struggle, and the part of that was both enjoyable and the most difficult was writing about emergence, which everybody thinks is easy. You know, people go, oh yes, this is emerging and that's emerging, but it has a very particular and different and not necessarily compatible meanings. So just trying to kind of explain that well and think about it and agree with myself or disagree with myself. You know, myself used to have quite arguments about emergence and how to say it and what it meant. So that was probably the hardest.
It would be nice to have little fly-on-the-wall YouTube shorts sort of looking into your head.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the back of the room. Can we have the slide with the Mentimeter code so that the people at home who might also have questions can log on, and please post your question there. And Wilma is holding the iPad and she'll pass the questions on to us. Let's open it up now for the room. Who wants to go first? Who has a question? Yes, the gentleman there. Can you stand up, say your name, and then ask your question?
Hi, I'm Rick Span. I'm a researcher in design emergence from improv, jazz improv. Wrote a book building on Patricia Shaw. I saw an interview.
Oh, okay.
Patricia.
Okay, yes.
And
yeah.
I'm working also in the field of complexity, and what I'm interested in how jazz musicians or other artists are getting into flow states. So you might understand the idea of complexity and it's getting to you, but then you get, then you get into, did you hear a bit about what I said? Emergence design, coming from not only understanding it, but working practically in education, trying to help people understand what a groove state, how jazz musicians get into a groove.
Yes.
How that feels, and then you get into that state from my research where you move into this quantum field, where you are slowing down harmonic drive, bifurcation points and stuff like that. If you really are not sensing in a somatic way what's happening there, then in my experience people get the idea, but don't get to understanding how the stance or the feeling of that is.
Yes.
So I would be curious about your ideas on that.
Yes, so the Daoists use the word, have a word Zin, X-I-N, which means heart-mind. And one of the things I do talk about in the book is that to apprehend patterns is kind of, it's more than the cognitive. I noticed in the internal development goals, they have complexity as a thinking process, and I'm thinking, well, it's not. It's if you just think it's a thinking process, you're missing the point. There's something about it's a visceral, somatic, embodied kind of knowing. And a chap called Brian Goodwin, who some of you may have heard of, was a theoretical biologist and was definitely, you know, wrote sums and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, towards the end of his career, you know, he would be seen sitting looking at a forest, or, you know, observing and saying, what can I know about this forest? What's my subjective response to it? He worked with Patricia Shaw as well. So there's something about apprehending systems. This is one part of the answer, which is more than just cognition. It's if you like, it's a right brain process, but there's something somatic about it too, and I agree. The other part of it, and I do write a bit in the book about something I ended up calling processual emergence, and it's a bit like what you're talking about, the jazz musician. If you have a group of people in a room trying to come out with a solution to something, and they're all, you know, you go through a kind of norming, storming. Do you remember those words? You know, people sit there politely, or they all fall out or something, but they remain within their ego boundaries. They're sort of, you know, sitting here and they're having a discussion. If a group can be with each other long enough or trust each other enough that those ego boundaries relax and there's a sort of flowing connection between them, David Bohm talked about this with dialogue, then new ideas somehow emerge in the room that couldn't have been thought if we were all sitting there having this kind of, you know, very mental conversation. That's a sort of processual emergence. And there's something about knowing, you know, meditating or being mindful or walking quietly in the forest, or that issue about the way jazz musicians play together, which is very Daoist. I talk about jazz musicians a bit in the book. So I agree, it's more than thinking. It's a thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got a question from the screen.
Yes. Yeah, so I have a question here. I can't see who it's from, but it says, how can it be that we've been so far behind or so long between the Daoism in the 5th century and now? So what has happened in between?
Yes, yeah. Well, one of the sort of narratives of this is you know, if you want a future that if you're worried about the longer term, you know, if you feel that you want to be fair, if you want to be compassionate, then that's one thing. But if you want to win, you know, in the short term, this isn't the way to do it. The way to do it is a kind of I'm using these words as a description. I'm not competent to know how the brain works, but a left brain, analytical, ruthless, how to win mentality, and you will win in the short term. You may not win in the long term. And what seems to have happened to humankind is it goes through periods of kind of, you know, pulling together and caring, and then if you want to go against the grain and you know, be ruthless and win and use your brain as a kind of, you know, your analytical brain as a weapon, then you can win. And it's very beguiling. So we seem to, if you look at, you've probably read Collapse by Jared Diamond. It's a story of how societies, they all seem to go the same way. They come along, so some empire will come along, the Roman Empire, and there gets a point where it's so unequal, so bestial, so corrupt, so ruthless that in the end it doesn't sustain, it collapses. But this is what the Daoists and the Buddhists are saying, is that people have both the potential to be selfish and the potential to be other-centred. They have, Ian McGilchrist has written a lot about this, the idea of the brain having the master and his emissary, that we started with a sort of right-brained apprehension. You know, if we were hunting animals to eat, then in the Taoist sense, we apprehended the terrain with our right brain, and then we would see something, then we'd go into a planning mode to decide how to kill it, if you like. Somebody did try and make me talk about bird spotting as being rather nicer than killing animals, but it doesn't work quite so well. I don't think there were bird spotting at the time. So there's this sort of tension between left brain, right brain, between other-centeredness and thinking about everything and thinking about the future and just wanting to win now, is a tension in humans that's been there from the beginning. And what Ian McGilchrist would say is we were right brain attuned and the left brain was our tool to use, but we flipped it in our Western modern society so that it's all about, it's something I was talking about this afternoon, in our organisations, what's valued is it's better to play the game and stick to the rules than actually do it well sometimes. You know, it's this focus on measurement control. Even if it doesn't work, it has become very, very powerful. So it's I think that's why it happens. And we sort of we reveal the truth again, and then we kind of, you know, it goes wrong again in the same way. That seems to be the history of society.
And then you just showed us you called it resonance. On my WhatsApp, people said, "Well, what Jean's talking about? I just read a book from current Dutch authors. It seems to be emerging, this kind of thinking."
Yes.
Should we interpret that, in your opinion, as a positive or a even more negative sign of the times that we're in? Is it positive that we sort of seem to embrace this kind of thinking?
What the complexity sort of thinking?
Yeah, that whole sort of wave of literature standing up in all kind of fields and evidence bases.
Yes, I think that you don't. I mean, I'm telling this story through the lens of complexity, but people get there in. That's the point of the book in a way. People get there in different ways. But if people are getting there, maybe there's something in it. You know, maybe we're starting. You know, and it you know, the Buddhist ideas are very similar as well. These are not new ideas, but perhaps there's an appetite. I think sadly there's a kind of split in our world at the moment. There are people saying we can't go on like this. You know, we need to understand. You know, how things emerge. We need to be able to make judgments in uncertainty. We need to understand the connected whole of the world. It's never been the difference between the Roman Empire and now is that we really do live in a global world. You know, if society, you know, is having difficulties, it's not going to happen in one place. It's kind of fairly, you know, the pandemics and climate change, and you know, the commercial world is a global world. So it's we seem to be split between people theorising in all sorts of ways and saying, hey, look, there's something here. I'm looking at it from a point of view of psychology. I'm looking at it from the point of view of politics. But people are homing in the same territory. That's brilliant. You know, it doesn't have to come. I'm just using my science as a form of authority to argue with the mechanical thinkers. But I think on the other side, that in many ways organisations are being tightened up more and more. The paradox is because of the kind of reduction in public funds. You know, there's a sort of tightening and a machining You know, weirdly, if it doesn't work well, because it's neither more efficient than effective. I mean, I could talk a lot more about that. So it is. Don't you feel it's a split at the moment? There's almost like these guys are getting more mechanical at the same time as these guys are all, as you've said, you know, embracing these ideas.
Okay. I see a question at the back there, and then I'm coming to this side.
Hi, Lieve van Hetel. First of all, I want to thank you for what I think is the most brilliant lecture I've heard, and I hear a lot of lectures over months. So, fantastic. Because it resonates at a very deep level. And so I have two questions, and they're both in a way about the constellations, the spaces, and the institutions. So at the beginning of your talk, you said, well, I want to still be solidly scientific. And after hearing your lecture, I thought, what would that mean? Given what you're doing and given your ways of being that you present and the ways of reflecting that you present. Because what we know as the scientific disciplines, institutions, etc., are they also not, you know, having to be questioned at a much more fundamental level? And the other question is about spaces towards the end of the talk, where, of course, what you say about the current state of affairs, it resonates at all levels. The spaces or the fluxes or the potentials for these flows to happen require certain space, require certain encounters, require certain relationships. And if you see that the destructive powers are now so busy with destroying precisely that,
yes,
what can we do there? Because I agree with you, we don't know what will happen next, and I also hold on to that sort of sense of promise. But at the same time, you see the brutish sledgehammer tactics by which precisely these spaces of confluence, of convergence, are being destroyed.
Yeah.
So what do we do there?
Thank you. So what I'm doing in talking about science is I'm reframing what science is. So I'm saying you've got the wrong science to understand the social world. So I'm arguing scientifically about the nature of science. So in a complex world, narrative methods are scientific. If I was having this conversation this afternoon, if in order to understand change, the change happens in this micro granular, then looking in aggregate isn't going to surface the real process of change. So to be appropriately scientific in a complex world that's context specific and historically specific, you've got to have methods of following the minutiae of the change, or you'll miss the very thing that you're trying to capture. So I'm reframing what science is in that sense. I'm sort of challenging, you've got the wrong science, guys. But because I'm arguing it from a scientific perspective, in my, you know, from my power, my authority is in that, then it has a power to challenge people who go, oh, well, you don't really know much about science, you know, you're a girl, which of course happens sometimes as well. So it's kind of, it forms, I shouldn't have said that really. I would say something, I wish I hadn't said that to everybody listening to this. It was just, sometimes it feels like, you know, I have to go, you know, excuse me, I'm a fellow of the Institute of Physics, you know, so that, there's something about reframing science that I'm trying to say. I'm not really talking about scientific institutions who are still, you know, sitting in their own fields. The other question about, so what do we do? And I got a lot of inspiration from this from reading people like Václav Havel. And so, first of all, he's saying, you know, we have more power than we think. We're going to have to regard governance as something that we all join in and do. You know, you know, governments that are becoming more authoritarian rely on a combination of fear and apathy. But we don't have to do that. You know, we can do things, we can stand up, we can be counted. And what does that mean? The other thing that Václav Havel says is that there's a kind of pre-political stage where, in a sense, what happened, when he talks about, you know, what happened at, you know, the kind of the fall of the USSR was, in some ways, people just got fed up. They just couldn't bear it anymore to be told what to wear and what to read and what music to listen to. So there was a sense in which there was an uprising, not in a political sense, but people just going, do you know what? I'm going to sing this song. I'm going to wear this. I'm going here, and that kind of rising. And although I kind of rather enjoy using the phrase, it is letting 100 flowers bloom. It is this idea that sometimes change happens not by cohering everything into a thing and having a plan and going over there, but encouraging, this diversity of view. I went to a very interesting talk a couple of weeks ago by, some of you will have heard of a woman called Judith Butler, who wrote about gender 35 years ago, and she's brought out another book on gender. But what was really fascinating about her talk and what she was trying to say, there were a lot of young people there, and she was saying, your issue might be your identity, but you've got to peel back and look at the principles that underpin what that means. What you mean is you want to be free, you want freedom, you want to be able to be yourself without fear. And if you want to be yourself without fear, you've got to imagine that other people want to be themselves without fear, whether they're old or, it's a racial or demographic issue or whatever it is. Then you can't campaign just, in a sense, you may be more interested in your issue, but we have at least to be inclusive and tolerant of other issues and understand that the principles that we're fighting for, not the thing, your thing might be, saving donkeys, but what we're really fighting for is a kind of, a care for the natural world and for each other. And, her point was that often right-wing thinkers have a very clear message. The left-wing fragments, the people who mean well and are trying to, I'm going to upset loads of people, aren't I, again? But, there's something about a fragmentation of the left that we have to get over. It isn't, we don't all have to be the same, but there has to be a sense in which we understand how to create a coherent space in which those diverse views can come together, but not divide, not make people choose between them. And I thought that was, a very important point she's making. So what I find from reading, if I read these authors through my lens, with the lens that I take, I learn a lot. I get inspiration from, yes, I can see that, and there's some that, anyway, I'll stop there. So there are many things in,
Right, we're going to do, oh my goodness, so many hands there. We're going to do back to front, so let's start there. And let's try to keep the questions short. And I'm
the answer short, yes.
Keep the answer short, yes, thank you.
Hi, my compliments. A fabulous piece of work that you've accomplished. My sincere compliments. I have a question on what you mentioned before about lowering ego boundaries. You mentioned in the book that perspective change or seeing things from a different view usually is fundamental to, let's say, governmental change or policy change. How do you inspire thinking about complexity, or in your words, how do you inspire dancing with the paradox to people with big ego boundaries?
Yes. Well, I think that it's a really interesting question about a sort of somebody asked me this question, it's like, what is your pedagogy? And I was thinking, oh dear, I've never really thought about it in those ways. But we had some very good conversations about this. And part of what I'm trying to say to people in a way is I'm trying to, so partly I'm trying to say, look, guys, science says this, get over it. Let's argue with me about this. This is another view. This is something you can't just walk away from. That's part of it. That's a method. There's also, as you can tell in how I talk, there's a lot of stories that if you can bring something to life, it's one thing to talk about paradox, but if you can raise a story that brings it to life, or you talk about the difficulty of bending the rules, if you have a story, it brings it to life. So I think telling stories is something, and I think comparisons sometimes from other countries. You know, if you can find an example where it works here, then people feel better, like, oh, well, it works there, you know, maybe we could try it. So I try, I think that, you know, getting complexity, it's like, how do you get people that are really steeped in a mechanical world, in you know, a power structure that tells them they've got to be certain. You won't get any funding unless you've got a plan. I think that part of what you have to do is if you're in leadership positions or in management positions, is create environments where people are rewarded by admitting uncertainty or taking a few risks or trying something out. So it is beholden on all of us in our variety of ways, including in our families. How do you create conditions where people are more rewarded for not just, you know, kind of doing the thing, planning, doing, reviewing? So those are the kind of things. I think in terms of these big power guys, you know, these power people, I think you can't take them. Well, I think two things. You have to do things around them, and show, you know, have an experiment here, get this working. And I think this is entirely away from complexity, but it's you know, people. This would be my view: is appeasement doesn't work. You know, if you have somebody who's a really, you know, big ego guy, the only thing they understand is standing up to them. But that's nothing to do with complexity. That's just my view. So,
Well, we appreciate that.
yeah.
I think there were more questions there in the back.
Hi, thank you very much. Very interesting talk and also very nice book to read. I've indeed been reading your book.
Thank you.
I had a question from the move you seem to make also in your talk, but also in your book, from the is to the ought. And maybe I should explain that I'm a lawyer. So I was wondering, just the fact that in your ontology, you're describing a complex world, or you're describing how complexity works. How do you make that move to how things are supposed to be? Because we've been talking about politics quite a bit now, but as a lawyer, I'm always very worried about making that move because, you know, when you're talking about the odd, you have to have some kind of a normative theory, and that usually doesn't come from ideas around natural sciences. So I was wondering how complexity as an ontology can help us derive to a normativity about how to organize our social world.
So complexity as a science doesn't. It will tell you how to, you know, constellate power for yourself, as much as it will suggest how to be resilient. So in a sense, it's value free. So the science is value free. What I'm adding to that is, I want my activism, my desire is for a sustainable, resilient future. That fairness is something that would be a value for me, but actually a balancing in the world is actually more resilient as well. So it's good for both reasons. So there's something. There's two aspects of that. So for me, it's easy. You know, I imagine I would like a world where people are safe and free. It's pretty equal, not at the levels of inequality that we have now, and we live in such a way that there's a sustainable future. And we stop ignoring climate change. So I find that easy. That's you know, I'm completely open about that in the book. They are my values. That's what I'm trying to do. Now, complexity theory will also help people who are trying to go in the opposite direction. It tells you, in a sense, what to do. So that's outside of the natural science. That's a kind of vision. All I can say in terms of, you know, a kind of normative view is, well, what do you think? You know, is that something you want? You know, and not everybody does. You know, I've sort of been to talks with quite recently with economists who go, well, you know, of course, you know, we'll get there with economic growth. It's fine, you know. We'll have technological solutions. We'll be able to keep growing. And people are selfish, but you know, it's not really up to, you know, not up to businesses to have to bother about, you know, their values. It's up to governance, you know, whoever governance is, you know, these days. So there are alternative views. All I can do from little old me is to kind of express my desire for that kind of future, and try and act in a way that's congruent with that. So I think there's something as well that's behavioral on all of us. This is again my view. Is I've got to let you see me, and you've got to make a judgment about whether these are words. Do I kind of like this as a piece of science because it's fun, or does this go through me? You know, is this how I live my life? You know, when I talk about values, you know, I'm not saying I get everything right, but do you believe me as an authentic being who's living this stuff, or not? So there's something about how can I actually act in a way that's congruent with my own vision, and how can you feel I do? So that maybe in my own little way that's inspiring for other people. So I think that's my view of what we have to do, and I find, you know, the vision of the future, or the desired future seems fairly. I don't find it difficult to express, but then you know, it doesn't mean to say everybody would agree. So that's a reasonably medium-sized answer. Yeah,
medium-sized answer.
I was looking at the back for time. Am I right? Do I have about 2 minutes left? 5 minutes? Yeah. Okay. So the gentleman over there. Yeah.
And should we check in on the iPad whether we've got a question from back home or wherever people are? Go ahead.
Thank you for your talk. It's a little bit strange if you grow up with two cultures, but the one who holding power now, right? The economists, the politicians, is actually more in the, you know, the analysis phase, compared to synthesis, individualistic phase. I mean, individualism is here very, very, very important, right? So I think with the capitalism and liberalism, we created also a system where you have to be egoistic. You know what I mean?
Yes.
In a company, you have to be. I mean, maybe this was not the intention, but because your assumption is people are individualistic, egoistic ones.
Yes.
I mean, the reflexivity is that you created a system around you which makes the people here should be egoistic.
Yes.
Otherwise, you cannot survive, right?
Well.
So.
Yeah.
But then I was thinking more philosophical on this, is that every system which goes to its extreme, you know, the Tai Chi 2, you know, the circle thing, myself always thought everything which goes to the extreme in the egoistic one, it's very easy to break, but I think that will be painful.
Yes, well, so part of what I'm talking about is in a path-dependent understanding. If you tell people they're selfish and you reward them for being selfish, they'll become more selfish. So that's what we've created. And then what do you do about it? And that's where some of these political writers are interesting. I think, you know, you've got to decide at the end of the day what's okay for you. You know, are you going to go along with that, or aren't you going to go along with that? There was a good Netflix series I was watching recently about Robert De Niro playing an ex-president of the United States, and the whole film centred on this dilemma of basically was he going to shop his own children, his daughter who'd done something bad, or was he going to hide it and protect his child? You know, and I don't do the spoiler and tell you what he did, but we've got choices, haven't we? Whatever system we're in. You know, we've got choices, so it's easy to go along with. You know, how many times in societies have we gone along with things? It's up to us. I can't, you know, we've always got a choice. You know, Viktor Frankl in Auschwitz wrote that at the end, even if you've got very little agency, you know, in what you can do, you know, you don't choose to be in Auschwitz, you can at least choose your attitude to what's happening to you. You can still pat somebody on the back and share your last piece of bread. So I think we have you know, that's what I feel. It's impossible. People are rewarded for really, you know, for selfishness. It's just like some economists just say, well, people are selfish, and I'm going, well, no, they're not. That's only one aspect of, you know, clearly they're not just selfish, but we have created something through our economic and political systems, and it'll either break, as you say, or we will, in our own little ways. And there's ways that this has happened in the past. We have to kind of choose for ourselves how we're going to be, I think. So.
Okay, last question is a question from home.
Oh, yes. Well, I try to, because there's suddenly a lot of questions from home, and there are 3 or more about leadership, and especially emerging leaders, or when you're a becoming leader, developing leader, and whether you have ideas on what would be the one practice that would help engage these emerging leaders with complexity. Maybe, one thing that you think that is really a good example of how to, something that you do maybe, or that you,
Yes. Ooh, I'm just wondering how to answer
Save
that.
the best for last.
I know. I can't really, I don't know how to answer that.
And maybe that's also about the waves, or whether how to, if you see these waves happening, or how do you deal with that as a leader?
I think in terms of getting complexity, I think it's a really good question. How do you get people to get complexity? And I think I've partially answered that, in the sense of it's stories, it's about illustrations, it's about creating an environment where people can be rewarded for, you know, bending the rules or experimenting, or, you know, expressing uncertainty. So I think as a developing leader, when you're trying to do that, I think it's important to have a peer group and mentors for that, and I think that's true of all of us. You know, we were talking about this the other day. You need a kind of peer group where you can talk about these ideas and you know, learn and disagree and be vulnerable and those sort of things. So I think for somebody trying to move in this direction, they need to feel resourced in doing that. So that's I think that's the best I can do.
Well, I feel that I'm really resourced by spending a day with you and hearing about your work and your thoughts. Can we say that for the people who are here, you'll stay with us for a bit?
Sure.
The book is for sale. The book is also for sale for your friends, colleagues, your manager, or everyone else you want to share it with. You're also available for questions.
Sure.
And I think we can promise the people at home that we'll give you the rest of the questions, and you might find a minute to reflect on them, for example, on LinkedIn or something.
Yes, for sure.
Give some reflections. Great.
And can I just thank you, Karen, and Wilma, and Lenka there, for inviting me, for hosting me, for answering innumerable questions about what am I supposed to do to get from here to here, and can you please send me a Google map, and all these things. I've been very well. I really appreciate, you know, the opportunity that you've given me to come here, and your support and friendship, and you know, thank you very much. And also to you and the venue here. I've felt very, very welcomed and supported. So thank you too.
So thank you. I think that's the end of the program tonight. So you can go and buy the book, and then go downstairs for drinks. And there will also be the opportunity to talk to Jean a bit more. So thank you, and hope you stay a bit longer.
And go home safely.